Hey, welcome to the Lowdown newsletter, where we talk about everything that's happened in aviation and defense the past week, things I think you'll find interesting if you're into that kind of thing. Couple admin notes before we get rolling into the podcast today. We launched a giveaway for these PVC patches. So that's fresh off the presses. And if you are a newsletter subscriber and you happen to like PVC patches, just by being a newsletter subscriber, you're entered into the giveaway, which we'll draw every couple weeks. In fact, I'm going to do the first drawing here right after I record this episode. But if you want more chances and more entries to win these patches, you refer friends and family members. So if you got someone you think might be interested in this, do me a favor, share the content, help the podcast grow. Check that out. If that's your thing, make sure you get the newsletter that's linked down below. Also, shout out to Attack Coffee. They just sent me some swag and some coffee, which I haven't had a chance to brew up yet, but it just came in right before I hit record, and I thought it'd be important to just give them a shout out. You got some A10 guys who created a coffee company, which I think is awesome. I'll link them down below. I mean, I'll just smell the back, the little thing there. It's like, just smells like freedom. So that's getting brewed up tomorrow morning. So shout out to Attack Coffee for sending that. I'm looking forward to brewing some awesome coffee there. All right, let's jump over to the newsletter and take a look at this past week. So last week was definitely a really rough week when it comes to aviation. Three significant mishaps. The F-35 crash up in Eielson Air Force Base in Alaska. We did a breakdown video of what we know and really what the Safety Investigation Board and the Accident Investigation Board will be doing and what the process goes. There's not a lot of speculation. Try to avoid the speculation there because the investigations are going to determine what caused that mishap and what happened to that F-35. The fortunate news there is the pilot safely ejected, and that's the most important piece. Then in D.C., Black Hawk helicopter and American Airlines flight colliding, killing all 67 individuals on those aircraft. It's incredibly tragic. Then followed by the Lear 55 in Philadelphia crashing into an urban area, killing everyone on board that aircraft as well as people on the ground and injuries on the ground. So our thoughts and prayers and condolences go out to all the friends and family involved with that. Aviation, when it goes sideways, it can go sideways quick and have devastating impact. But I think inherently airline travel is probably the safest it has ever been. Now the BB sometimes flies through the Swiss cheese model, as we say in the safety world, and tragedy strikes, but air travel has been inherently safe. And I want to highlight that by just looking at the past 25 years in the U.S. alone. So there have been really 5 major incidents with significant loss of life. Now, any loss of life is significant, right? But if we're talking numbers here and kind of paring it down, we had an Alaskan Airlines flight back in 2000 that crashed, had a bad jack screw in the horizontal stab, which unfortunately the pilots couldn't control and crashed into the Pacific Ocean. Then right after 9/11, we had the American Airlines flight that crashed into New York City. Now, this was obviously right after 9/11, so heightened tensions, but this was as a result of, I believe, the co-pilot, the first officer, making heavy inputs with the rudder. So the rudder on an Airbus 300, again, if I remember correctly, big old plane, transport category aircraft, you can't do full control or full deflection inputs with the rudder. At least you don't want to. It can cause some significant things. We had the Comair flight in August of 2006, taken off from the wrong runway. I didn't have enough runway there. The Clone Air flight 3407 crashing in New York. Pilot fatigued. I said in here icing because that is what I bit off on. I don't think the NTSB apparently put that as a causal factor. They did incur icing, but there's a lot of other pilot error things that went on with that one. And then recently, last week, with the American Eagle flight with all inhabitants on board there. So again, our thoughts and prayers going out there. But I think it does show like there's a lot of flights that go on each and every day, and a lot of professional air crews dedicate their lives making sure people get from point A to point B safely, and everyone wants to get home there. So, all right. All right, moving on to the threat of the day. We've got the Tu-95 Bear. This is one of Russia's primary strategic bombers. Multiple variants there with long-range capability, conventional and nuclear capability. If we just back up to, look at the props on this thing. So counter-rotating props, from what I understand, the thing's just got to be so incredibly loud. But much like the B-52 has been around and in service since the late 1950s, and it keeps getting upgraded as Russia keeps this thing zipping around for its strategic mission there. All right, jumping over to the flight line this week, Iran securing a purchase for Su-35s. So again, Su-35 is one of Russia's advanced fighters. We do have it linked there. Remember, the Russian Su-35 was headbutting the F-16 off Alaska a few months back, and the Alaskan F-16 pilot captured that on GoPro, which was pretty spicy to say the least. So you want to check that out if you haven't done that. Remember, Iran is flying the F-14, the F-5, as well as a slew of MiG-29s and other aircraft from other nations as well. But the Su-35 is definitely a replacement that it needs to modernize its Air Force as the F-14 and the F-5 continue to age out. So the first 2 Strike Eagles equipped with the IPWAS, I don't know how you actually pronounce that acronym. I'd be super curious. So those have arrived over in Lakenheath. It was announced back in December that it made its first flight. Let's see, we're not going to see what this thing looks like but an integrated defensive suite into the Strike Eagle, allowing it for both offensive, defensive, smart jamming, smart denying, deterring, or disrupting and degrading when it goes out there, making it more viable in highly contested environments out there. This is something that the F-16 originally was going to be getting, an integrative offensive and defensive suite where, hey, the radar, the defensive suite all talks. Right now, the pods don't necessarily talk, and there's a lot of input that the pilot has to make these things happen. And you might imagine that if you're going out there doing an air-to-air fight, you'd like to be able to offensively jam as you go across the line, degrade, disrupt the enemy radar, so you're able to be more effective. But then, if it devolves into a close-range fight, being able to switch to a defensive mode so that you can provide protection to your jet would be pretty handy. But right now, not having an integrated suite where the radar is talking to the defensive suite and vice versa degrades some of the systems there. So it sounds like the Strike Eagle is getting some great upgrades. And again, the first one landed a few weeks ago at Lakenheath, and this should take a couple years to upgrade. Looks like the Strike Eagle fleet as well as the EX fleet would have this integrated into it. All right, China's been building these land bridges. Now, apparently, analysts have noticed some weird ships being built in Guangzhou, China, in a shipyard there in southern China. Barges that would basically be able to provide a land bridge, which you can see here in the picture with, this long road that would tip out. So if you were going to invade an island that had, terrain that was challenging to make a beach landing upon in most spots, and you needed to be able to reach a couple hundred feet from the water to land, you had to build a ship. So they're saying this is approximately 120 meter design where this bridge would be able to drop down in front, and then you'd be able to load vehicles or other things on the aft portion of this barge and drive it onto the land from the coast there. So that is definitely a unique thing. And as the discussion keeps going around the invasion of Taiwan, this seems like a capability that you would need to have if you would want to do such a thing. This is a great time to talk about the sponsor of today's episode, which is Aura. Data brokerages are cashing in on your sensitive data out there. Phone numbers, birthdays, social security numbers, addresses, email addresses. They all want this information. They have this information, and they sell it to marketers, scammers, and everyone in between. Or in the worst case scenario, someone steals your identity and does something nefarious with it. Best case scenario, you just get bombarded with spam. Worst case, criminals weaponize your data for fraud. So why Aura? Automatic opt-outs first and foremost. I've talked about this before. I had over 60 data brokerages that had my information, and they go right to work to removing you from that. Aura confronts the 100 plus data brokerages daily to remove your information from public databases. They monitor the dark web 24/7 and send you alert if your information surfaces any kind of breaches. Additionally, they offer up to $5 million in identity theft insurance should the worst happen. Best case, you get to try Aura with the link down below, absolutely free, or you can go to aura.com/afterburn and get 14 days free and see if you're exposed now. All right, the Pentagon has revoked retired General Mark Milley's security detail as well as the security clearance. This came with Secretary Pete Hegseth, who stripped Mark Milley of his security clearance and the protective detail on January 29th. Additionally, you might remember former Secretary of State and CIA Director Mike Pompeo, Special Envoy to Iran Brian Hook, and National Security Advisor John Bolton also had their security details stripped from them as well. Now, John Bolton, Brian Hook, and Mike Pompeo, all these gentlemen were involved with the the drone strike that took out the Iranian Revolutionary Guard General Khomeini back in January of 2020. And so normally these protective details only last until they leave office or 6 months after they leave office, 6 weeks, depending on who they are and what their role was. But in this case, John Bolton, for instance, still has viable threats, as well as Mike Pompeo. And so they've lost their security detail as a result of this. So there you go. It's almost dizzying the amount of sabotage that's going on with Undersea's cable. And you really don't hear too much about it. But here is yet another one of a critical fiber optic cable that was severed this past week in Swedish waters. And so, which Sweden has detained this ship and its crew, which you can see pictured here in the newsletter. Again, crazy times we live in, and it just keeps going and going. On the heels of that, Sweden also announced a $1.2 billion military aid package for Ukraine. This is the largest military aid package that they have signed up to give Ukraine. It's totaling 1.23 billion, bringing its total aid up to 5.8 billion since 2022. This one includes 90 combat boats, 1,500 TOW anti-tank missiles, 200 AT-4 attack tank weapons, $630 million for new artillery, drones, long-range strike systems, $178 million to fund the Ukrainian defense industrial production, such as long-range missiles and drones there, and then $71 million for repair there. Finally, as we get close to the end here, Poland has secured a $745 million deal to buy 200 plus AGM-88, the HARM missiles, or AGM missiles, as now, I guess, as they become more advanced, not just the HARM, but a high-speed anti-radiation missile going after radar sites, as well as a whole slew of other things. So Poland is equipping this on their F-35, or that's the main plan, with potentially upgrading him to be able to be compatible with their F-16 fleet there. NGAD, NGAD, Next Generation Air Dominance Fighter, got hit on pause. And we're going to do a video on the 2050 Air Force plan, because they talk about it in great detail as much as you can. But basically, this is going to be a really expensive aircraft, and we can't afford to get it wrong. So hit pause. But part of this past week, the Air Force has tripled its funding, both to GE and Pratt & Whitney, to develop this 6th generation engine that would fit in this plane. Originally, it was going to be a $975 million kind of R&D contract to these two companies. Now it's going to be $3.5 billion to generate the next generation adaptive propulsion. So NGAP there, or I'm not going to say how the Navy says it, but there you go. All right, that wraps up our newsletter for this week. Again, remember, if you're a patch person, or if you're not a patch person and you want some free swag, sign up for the newsletter. You get entered into the contest. Refer a friend. Help the podcast grow. Until next time, we'll see you.